It all started with a phone call. And a bouquet. The worst kind of call you can get. I stood outside the terminal, watching the heavy flow of passengers spill out from the gate, hoping to catch a glimpse of my wife, Casey. She was supposed to be on Flight 118, coming in from Chicago. She'd said she was attending a scientific conference. A big one. Something to do with aerospace. It seemed like a big deal at the time. She'd been so excited about it. But now, all I could do was stare at the flight board, which confirmed the plane had arrived on time, right as scheduled. People moved past me in droves. Some of them looked happy. Others, like me, just looked lost. My eyes kept scanning the crowd, searching for her familiar face. I had this stupid bouquet in my hands, the flowers trembling a little, though I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or nerves. I could picture her face so clearly in my mind. Soft eyes, a smile that always felt like it belonged to the sun itself. But there was nothing. No sign of Casey. It had been 20 minutes. And still nothing. I checked my watch again, feeling my pulse quicken. Maybe she was just stuck behind a crowd, or maybe she was delayed at baggage claim. But I don't know. Something didn't feel right. My instincts were usually pretty solid, and right then, they were screaming at me. So I pulled out my phone and tried calling her. It rang twice before I heard the vibration and a voice on the other end. But it wasn't Casey. "Hello?" I said, confused. There was a pause before the voice responded. "This is Casey's phone, right?" a man said, his voice low and rough. "I found it out in the woods outside Bakersfield. There's also a woman's backpack, and, the remains of a tent." My stomach dropped. Bakersfield? That was 1,000 miles from Chicago. That's not even close to where she was supposed to be. And why was this stranger calling me? My throat tightened as I asked, "Where's Casey? Is she with you?" The man was quiet for a long beat, and I could almost hear the hesitation in his voice before he answered, "I don't know. There's no one here. Just the backpack and—" "I'm sorry, but there's blood." My knees felt like they were going to give way under me. Blood. A dark, heavy thought lodged itself in my brain, one that I couldn't shake off. I had no idea where my wife was. I just stood there, staring into the crowd of strangers. The people around me continued on with their lives, but my whole world had just come to a crashing halt. My wife had disappeared, and now I didn't know if she was alive or if I would ever see her again. I hung up and immediately called the police, shaking as I explained everything. They promised to get on it immediately, but all I could do was stand there, feeling completely helpless. The police didn't take long to respond. I gave them all the details, the phone call, the strange man, and the blood in the woods, and they promised they would start an investigation. But when I mentioned Flight 118 and Casey's supposed conference in Chicago, their reactions were far from what I expected. It didn't take long before they hit me with the first shock. Casey McLean wasn't registered on Flight 118. In fact, there was no record of anyone named Casey McLean on any flight coming from Chicago at all. I froze at the news. There had to be a mistake, right? Maybe her ticket was under a different name or something. Maybe there was some kind of error in the system. But no. They checked and double-checked. There was no sign of her on any plane that day, and there was no scientific conference in Chicago during the dates she'd mentioned. The entire thing was a lie. I felt like the ground had been ripped from under me. Casey had lied to me. But why? Why would she do that? I left the police station in a daze. Nothing made sense. The more I tried to think about it, the more confused I became. What was she doing in Bakersfield? Why had she told me she was going to a conference? Where was she now, and who had that man been? And what about the blood? It was all too much. I had to get answers. So, I drove. Bakersfield wasn't exactly close, about 6 hours of highway between me and the dark woods that had somehow become a central point in my wife's disappearance. The drive was a blur, the road a constant ribbon stretching out under my tires, but I kept telling myself that I would find her. I couldn't believe anything else. The possibility that Casey was in danger had lodged itself in my mind, and I refused to entertain any other idea. When I finally arrived, I went straight to the area where Casey's belongings had been found. The police had already done a preliminary search, but it didn't make any sense. They'd found a burned-out fire and traces of blood, but no body. No sign of Casey. The backpack, the phone, and the tent remnants were all they had to go on. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. This wasn't a coincidence. I wasn't looking for someone who had gotten lost. This wasn't some camping mishap. Whoever had left this scene knew exactly what they were doing. That night, I stayed at a motel and sifted through the details. I needed to see everything for myself, especially the footage from the security cameras near the forest. The next morning, I was at the station, asking to view anything they had. The officer there handed me a few clips from the cameras, and as I sat down to watch, my heart began to race again. The video wasn't from long before, just the day before, in fact. And there she was, Casey. But she wasn't alone. I leaned in closer to the screen. She stepped out of a car in the footage, looking just like my wife, except she wasn't alone. A woman was with her. The woman's face was partially obscured by a hood, but I could see enough. It was as though Casey had a doppelganger. The woman looked exactly like her, same hair, same body shape, same movements. I had to blink to make sure I wasn't seeing things. This couldn't be real. Who was this woman? And why was Casey with her? The footage ended there, and I sat in stunned silence. I didn't understand what I was seeing. Was this a trick? Was it some kind of sick game? There was only one thing I knew for sure. I had to find answers. The woman with Casey wasn't just a stranger. She was someone with a connection to my wife. I didn't know how or why, but I was going to find out. And I wouldn't stop until I did. The next few days felt like a blur of confusion and dread. I couldn't shake the images of that woman in the video, the one who looked exactly like Casey. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. It haunted me, and I couldn't make sense of it. I thought I knew my wife better than anyone in the world, but now there was this stranger who was wearing her face, walking beside her in the woods. What did it mean? Was this some kind of twisted coincidence, or was something far more sinister going on? I couldn't wrap my head around it. I had to know who this woman was and why she was with Casey. I spent hours combing through anything I could find on both Casey and the woman in the footage. I didn't even know where to start, but something kept nagging at me. I had this gut feeling that I was on the edge of discovering something massive, something that could explain everything. And then, it hit me, the abandoned house. The GPS on Casey's phone had pinged from a location about 2 hours away from where her belongings were found. It was an old, rundown house, nothing out of the ordinary, just one of those forgotten places that didn't show up on many maps. The police had brushed it off, thinking it was just some random spot. But something about it stuck with me. Something about the way Casey's phone had led her there, seemingly without reason. I decided to go there myself. I made the drive alone, again, but this time, I felt like I was on the edge of something bigger than just my wife's disappearance. The house was crumbling, barely standing, its windows boarded up, and the air around it felt wrong. The moment I stepped inside, it hit me. I wasn't just looking at an old, abandoned house. I was looking at a place that held secrets. The walls were covered with peeling paint, and dust had long since claimed the furniture. But in one room, things were different. There, the walls were covered with photographs. Dozens of photos, all of Casey. Some of them looked old, faded, but others were fresh. Some were even taken just weeks ago, long after she'd gone missing. My heart began to race as I scanned the pictures. There were shots of her walking down the street, of her at our favorite cafe, of her at home. But as I looked closer, I realized something that stopped me cold. One of the photos wasn't taken by Casey. I recognized the angle. It was taken from inside our bedroom. A photo of her lying in bed with another woman. I gasped. The woman's face was blurry, but there was no mistaking it. The woman in the photo was the same woman I'd seen in the footage, the one with the hood. I stumbled backward, feeling like I was suffocating. I knew that bed. I knew every inch of it. I could still smell the perfume Casey used to wear, the faint scent of lavender and vanilla. But this photo wasn't taken by me or by Casey. Someone had been inside our house. Someone had been watching us, and now I was staring at their evidence. I didn't know what was worse, that Casey had kept this secret from me, or that someone else had been in our home, watching us, taking these photos. I felt sick. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But it wasn't just the photo that made my stomach turn. It was the fact that Casey had been lying to me, and she hadn't told me the truth about anything. She had never mentioned the woman in the photos. And if she was involved with her, why didn't she tell me? There was only one way forward. I had to find her. I had to confront Casey, and I had to get the truth, no matter what it cost me. And as I stood in that abandoned house, surrounded by secrets and lies, I realized that I wasn't just searching for Casey anymore. I was searching for the truth, whatever that truth might be. When I arrived at the house, it was exactly as I imagined, decrepit, with faded paint peeling off the weathered wood, windows boarded up, and a heavy silence hanging in the air. It wasn't just abandoned, it felt forgotten, as if it had been erased from the world. There was an unnatural stillness that surrounded it, a sense that something had happened here, something significant, But whatever it was, it had been swept under the rug by time and neglect. The house stood in a clearing surrounded by trees, the overgrown grass and ivy creeping up around the foundation. Even though I was standing in broad daylight, the place felt oppressive, like something heavy and dark loomed just beyond my reach. I stepped cautiously onto the porch, the old boards creaking beneath my feet with each step, the sound seeming far too loud for the silence that enveloped the place. The door wasn't locked, which seemed odd, considering the house's obvious state of abandonment. It opened with a groan that sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew, dust, and age. The room I entered was nothing special, just a dilapidated living space, furniture covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. It looked like no one had lived there in years, and yet, there was something distinctly unsettling about it. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it felt wrong. I moved cautiously through the house, my steps slow and deliberate, as if I were intruding in a place that wasn't meant for me. It was quiet, too quiet, and every sound I made, no matter how small, echoed like a scream in the stillness. I passed through the kitchen, which looked like it had been untouched for decades, and into the back hallway. That was when I found the room. The room that changed everything. At first, I didn't notice anything particularly strange about it. It looked like another empty space, old walls, a dusty floor, and forgotten remnants of whatever had been left behind. But then I saw them, the photos. They were all over the walls, pinned haphazardly, some framed, others simply taped up. At first, I thought it was just some odd collection, the kind of thing a lonely person might put together to fill the empty space of their life. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized that every single one of these photos had one thing in common. They were of Casey. I took a step closer, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just a few pictures, it was a whole collection. Casey at the park. Casey walking our dog down the street. Casey laughing at the dinner table. But these weren't just random snapshots taken over the years. Some of these were recent, too recent. There were photos of her that I recognized, moments I remembered vividly, and then there were others that I didn't understand. There was a shot of her at our favorite cafe, her back to the camera as she sipped her coffee, a man standing behind her who was mostly out of frame. Another photo showed her standing by the car, looking directly into the lens, as if someone had been hiding in the bushes waiting for the perfect moment to snap a picture. I felt my heart start to pound, a deep unease settling in my chest. Who had been taking these photos? Why? And why hadn't Casey mentioned any of this? The photos were all so unsettling, but it wasn't until I looked closely at the next batch that I felt my blood run cold. One of the pictures wasn't taken at a cafe or a park or on a quiet street. It was taken in our home, our bedroom, to be exact. I recognized the bed, the way the sheets were arranged, the familiar clutter of our room. The photo was grainy, like it had been taken with an old camera, but there was no mistaking it. Casey was lying in our bed. But there was someone else with her. Another woman. The woman I had seen in the footage, the one who looked like her. But it was more than just the resemblance. It was something deeper, something more unsettling. The woman was lying beside Casey, their faces close, the intimacy of the moment captured without either of them knowing. The woman's face was mostly obscured, but it didn't matter. I knew it was her. It was the same woman I'd seen in the woods with Casey. I stared at the photo, my mind racing, trying to process what I was seeing. This was my bed, my bedroom, my life. But I had never seen this woman before. I had never seen them together. And I sure as hell hadn't taken this photo. I didn't know whether to feel sick or to feel betrayed. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I couldn't seem to catch my breath. I had to know the truth. I had to understand what was going on, why my wife was lying to me, why she had kept this hidden. But as I stood there in the room, surrounded by pictures of Casey and the woman I didn't know, the weight of the situation hit me hard. This wasn't just some random affair. This wasn't just a betrayal. There was something deeper at play, something more sinister. Whoever had taken these photos, whoever had been watching my wife, had been in my home. They had been in my life, lurking in the shadows, capturing moments that were supposed to be private, supposed to be ours. And now, I was staring at the evidence of it all. It was more than just unsettling. It was terrifying. It felt like my whole world was unraveling, piece by piece, and I didn't know how to stop it. The more I looked at the photos, the more questions flooded my mind. Who was this woman, and why had she been with Casey? Why had she taken such a personal, intimate photo of her? Why had Casey kept it all from me? The deeper I dug, the more I realized that this was no ordinary situation. It wasn't just about a missing wife or a cheating spouse. There were layers to this, things I couldn't understand yet but knew I needed to uncover. And the more I stared at the photos, the more I realized something even darker. I wasn't just looking for my wife anymore. I was looking for the truth, and I was willing to do whatever it took to find it. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, the photographs on the walls a reminder of the truth I wasn't ready to face. But I had no choice. I had to face it, even if it tore me apart. So, I left the house, feeling a sense of finality settle in my chest. The answers were out there, somewhere, and I was going to find them, no matter what it took. But little did I know, the truth was more terrifying than I could ever imagine. And the worst part was, I was about to discover that the woman in those photos, the one who looked exactly like Casey, was not just someone who had been a part of my wife's life. She was someone who had been living in it, in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. And I wasn't the only one who had been deceived. The drive back from that house felt like I was in a haze. The pictures, the hidden truth about Casey, the woman in the photos, everything was crashing down around me. I couldn't wrap my head around any of it. How long had this been going on? How long had I been living a lie? The more I thought about it, the more confused and angry I became. And I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop asking myself the same questions over and over again. What was going on? What had happened to my wife? I drove aimlessly for a while, not really sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't go back home yet. I couldn't face that place, the place where I'd shared so many memories with Casey, the place that had now been corrupted by the thought of another woman living in my life, in my home, without me even knowing. I pulled over to the side of the road, breathing deeply, trying to calm myself, trying to think clearly. But nothing made sense. I pulled out my phone and called the number that had been haunting me ever since the day I first got that call from the stranger in Bakersfield. Casey's phone. Every time I saw her number on my screen, my stomach churned. I hadn't heard from her directly in days, just the man who'd found her belongings in the woods. But this time, as the phone rang, I wasn't sure what I expected. Would it be Casey? Would it be another strange voice? The call connected, and for a moment, everything stood still. Then, I heard her voice. It was soft, shaky, like she wasn't sure if she should be saying anything at all. "Jared, is that you?" she asked, her voice thick with confusion. I didn't know what to say. The words caught in my throat. "Casey, where are you? What happened? I need to know. I don't understand any of this. What's going on? What's happening?" I asked, the urgency in my voice betraying the panic I was feeling. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end, and then she spoke again. "Jared, I don't know who I am anymore, but I know. I know I'm not her. I'm not the person you think I am." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. The confusion in her voice was like a knife in my gut. "What do you mean? What's happening? Where are you? Please, just tell me." But Casey didn't answer right away. She was silent for a long time, and in that silence, I could hear something else, the faintest whisper. It wasn't just the wind or a trick of the phone line. It was a voice, a soft, breathy voice that I couldn't place at first. And then, in a rush, Casey's voice came back on the line. "She's still here, Jared. She's right next to you. You need to be careful. You need to." Before she could finish, the call ended abruptly, cutting off in mid-sentence. I stared at the screen of my phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt a wave of nausea hit me as I processed what she had said. The voice. The whisper. It sounded like the woman in the photos. It sounded like the woman I had been chasing through this whole nightmare. The one who looked just like Casey. I didn't know what to do, but I had to find her. I had to find the real Casey. I couldn't let this thing, whatever it was, win. I didn't waste any time. I jumped back in my car and headed toward the location where Casey's belongings had been found. The woods near Bakersfield. There were so many unanswered questions. I had to understand what happened there. Who had been in those woods with her? Who had left the blood, the tent remnants, and the backpack? Was Casey even the person I thought she was anymore? I needed answers, and I had no choice but to find them, no matter where they led me. As I pulled into the area, the same sense of foreboding from before gripped me. The trees were thick here, casting long shadows in the afternoon light. It almost felt like something was waiting for me, watching from the darkness. I parked the car and stepped out, my breath catching in my throat as I glanced around. There was no sign of anyone nearby, no movement in the trees. But something about the place made my skin crawl. I had the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. I walked into the woods, trying to stay calm, but every snap of a twig under my feet made my heart skip a beat. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to jump out at me. The forest was eerily quiet. It felt as though the world had come to a standstill, and everything was just waiting for something to happen. As I moved deeper into the trees, I started to feel the weight of all the unknowns pressing on me. I didn't know if Casey was alive or dead. I didn't know if the woman in the photos was an imposter or something far darker. And I didn't know if I was walking into a trap. Then, I got the call. The one I wasn't prepared for. I pulled out my phone, and the screen read, "Incoming call, Casey." My pulse spiked. I hadn't expected to hear from her again, not after the strange call earlier. But there it was. I pressed the button to answer, my hands shaking. "Jared," her voice, weak and frightened, came through the speaker. "I don't know who I am, but I know I'm not her. She's right there. She's right next to you." I froze. My heart stopped. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I looked around, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread fill me. I didn't know what was real anymore, and I didn't know who was telling the truth. Was it Casey? Or was it the woman, her doppelganger? The woman I'd been chasing through this whole nightmare? My eyes darted around the trees. I had to make a choice. I had to figure out who was lying to me. But as I turned around to look behind me, there she was, standing just a few feet away. The woman. The one who looked exactly like Casey. But it wasn't Casey. I could tell now, even before she spoke. Her eyes were different, colder. She was smiling, but it wasn't the smile I knew. It wasn't the one that used to make my heart skip a beat. It was something darker. Something wrong. "You're too late, Jared," she said, her voice low and calm, like she had all the time in the world. "I'm the real one now, and there's nothing you can do about it." I stood frozen, staring at the woman who was not my wife, but looked exactly like her. The woman who had been living in my life without me knowing. The woman who had taken everything from me. And for the first time since all this began, I understood the horrifying truth. My wife was gone, and she wasn't coming back. I wasn't just fighting for her anymore. I was fighting for my own life.